you're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm speaking to all of you empaths. Being empathic is a superpower. And sometimes, though, that superpower can actually feel more like a burden because we take in these feelings. We try to process these feelings. Many times we might have empathy overload, where it seems like everything's coming at us and we don't know how to process it. And so in today's show, I want to give you some ways of being successful as an empath, to be able to feel your feelings, to be able to process those feelings, to be able to spotlight your superpower and help others without feeling used, overwhelmed, or helpless. Many empaths feel overwhelmed and helpless because we have engaged in media and connections that are not benefiting us, that are making us feel as though our hands are tied. And the first thing that I want to discuss in today's show is the impact of news media on empaths. And I want you to think about that impact. I want you to think about what that looks like. And I want to kind of create a picture for you. So there's a lot of people on our planet today who are not empathic. They just aren't. They're not empathic. And they can watch a newscast and they can see the story of the dying children or the dying animals or Mother Earth and our water source issues or the dying crops or the elderly or what have you. And they can see it and go, oh, okay, wow, that's sad. Move on with their life. Some people don't even connect with it being sad. They just see it, they move on. But an empath does not do that. An empath starts feeling for that person. Starts feeling the pain and the sorrow and the sadness of what that person, what that animal, what the planet, what the tree, what the crops are going through. And the empath absorbs it. And it goes through the entire day and sometimes into the next day and sometimes into the next day of the empath. And throughout that day-to-day life, more things get absorbed. Whether it's the newscast, whether it's the Facebook feed where you're seeing animal cruelty or abuse, or you're seeing something else that really just hurts and really weighs you down. Could also be the combination of the people that you live amongst. Maybe they're doing and going through stressful times in their life where you're processing that. Maybe you are also dealing with stressors and anxiety and pain in your life and processing that. So as an empath, remember, this is a superpower, but it can easily get out of hand. It can easily get out of hand because it's so much to process, and sometimes we don't even know how we are actually feeling. Recently, I've been working on some video content to put up on YouTube and social media, and I'm talking about a ritual, a morning routine, you might say, in order to benefit the empath, because I feel that there's a tendency of us to fall into the trap of non-empath folk. I don't know if anybody watched Harry Potter, but non-magical folk were the Muggles, and it's interesting. And you could say that non-empathic could be Muggles as well. Just a funny pun on expression, but seriously, think about it. It's a very amazing thing to have, but a lot of people don't possess it. And so there's a tendency, though, of empaths to not realize that they need to go about living their life differently than people who are not empathic. I don't know about you, but, recently I was doing some traveling and I was in the airport and I'm getting to my gate, and you know how wonderful now it seems like every airport has 1 million TVs on, and it seems that the carrier that they use is CNN, and some people it's Fox, and it's everywhere. You can't get away from it no matter where you are, and there's always some sort of horrible, emotionally trying heartstring pulling story that you come across. And it's very interesting because I used to not be able to safeguard myself. I would fall prey into that, start watching that. It would impact my whole entire day. It would impact my emotions and my feelings. And it was very challenging. And now I've figured out ways of dealing with that. And I figured out ways of kind of cutting that off and not viewing that. So the one good thing about the airport in that situation is usually the audio is not on. It's closed captions. So you read the caption. So you got to really want to watch it, right? So what I've realized is that, I put myself in a different position where I'm not paying attention to the TV and I can't see it. Usually I walk around and do something differently. But it can be really challenging as an empath, not only with social media as well, because you're not expecting it there. I don't know about you, but there were years ago when it wasn't like that on social media. You could see what a friend of yours was doing. Maybe a friend of yours adopted a really cute cat, and you could see the picture, or another friend of yours had a child, or somebody got married, or, whatever, somebody's grandkids up there. It was great, but now it seems like, you have that, but then you have all these situations that are taking place. Now it's about war and famine and animals and all this stuff. And I'm not saying that those aren't important, and I'm not saying that we want to act like it doesn't exist. But as an empath, we have to be very aware of how we process that. I had a client the other day that's been going through a lot of pain and struggles in their life, and they came across a disturbing TikTok video. And it was very disturbing to them. And they said that it just kept replaying over and over, and they couldn't stop crying. They had a lot of emotion around it. And I'm just saying, we have to be careful what we see, because as an empath, it's a lot harder for us to turn off those feelings or emotions, because we really do, have an ability to apprehend the mental and emotional state of another person. I mean, that's really real. And sometimes it can be helpful and sometimes not. Sometimes also we can put so much energy into that we're not actually focusing on our own. We're not focusing on ourselves. We begin to lose ourselves as an empath in those situations. And these are things that we need to wake up to, because if we're not aware of these situations, it can take over us. It can overwhelm us. It can be very, very stressful and very painful. And so we need to be aware of these types of possibilities. One of the things that I advise is to really wake up as an empath is to be aware of external influences. What kind of external influences that you have going on in the morning. And I really, really, really highly recommend turning that TV off, not looking at the social media feed, not opening yourself up to that type of programming, because there's probably a lot going on in your household already. So being able to eliminate that in the morning, and some of you, it's going to be hard because you're these news people. You love the news. You turn it on in the morning. It's something that you've done your entire life. But I think if you were to really analyze that and see it, you would actually realize that it's probably something you've done your entire life, but it's not ever once benefited you. And I'm not saying that it's not interesting or good to know kind of what's going on, but also this is what news they've brought to you. So there's a lot of things going on that a newscast of 30 minutes or an hour cannot cover. And a lot of the stuff that's going on that's good and positive and helpful and uniting is not happening at all. So it's not on the news at all. It's not showing you that at all, because it doesn't make ratings, because it doesn't scare you, because it doesn't put fear into you. And so we need to realize that as well. And remember, the other side of the coin is when somebody's not an empath, it doesn't really get to them, right? So it takes a lot to get to someone that's not an empath. It takes a lot of showing a lot of pain and suffering. Right? And we as empaths don't need to see more pain and suffering. We just don't. I mean, we would much rather give to an organization that helps animal abuse by seeing animals that are happy that have been rehabilitated than the other way around. The sad part of it is that there's a lot of folks in our society that don't have any empathy. And so they have to see this extreme picture that's being painted for them to do anything about it, or even connect the dots to the fact that they should do anything about it. And so empaths need to unite and stand together and realize that's not what we need in our life. We're going to do the right thing, but we don't need that type of impact in our life. We're going to help no matter what, but we don't need to see that imagery that's going to live with us all day and all through the next day and all through the next day. So let's go back into this morning routine. In the morning, eliminating that news media, eliminating that fear factor media, eliminating any of those outlets and sources that make us feel helpless or depressed or sad. We also need to realize who else in the household is impacting us. So if you're married, a lot of times marriage is an interesting aspect. Marriage is a yin-yang, right? A lot of times in marriage, one person feels one way, one person feels another. If you've been married for a long period of time, you know that some of the greatest moments of your life, your spouse was having the absolute worst week of their life. And I'm not kidding. I know that some of you say, wow, okay, preach. Some of you are like, what? But it's true, right? Haven't you had it where you're having the best situation in your life? Things are going well. Life is good. You're feeling good. You're on the top of the world, and your spouse is down in the dumps. And it can be really challenging because when you are an empath, when your spouse is going through pain and suffering, it's hard to separate that pain and suffering. And any of you that have had really successful moments, you know what I'm saying, that you can literally take that successful moment, something that you haven't experienced in your life, and within a few minutes, if you don't watch out, you can begin to own the other person's feelings and feeling down and feeling sad. And so it's not a bad thing, obviously. It's a superpower to be able to feel other people's feelings and be able to connect with that and be able to have like that paranormal, that next layer of connection. But we need to be able to use it wisely. And that's the case. We need to be able to use the magic wisely. And there's many ways of doing that. One thing that I've realized too is that a lot of times as an empath, we don't express the way we feel and the needs that we have in a relationship. We don't express that. And so we need to be able to understand what our needs are. And we need to be able to speak our needs. And that can be really challenging because a lot of times we're there for other people. I want them to have their needs met. I want them to feel good. I want them to be happy. But a lot of times as an empath, I feel like there's kind of a shame around asking for things or asking somebody to do things because we don't want to push them or make them feel bad or make them feel uncomfortable. So many empaths don't speak up for what they need or what they want in their life because they're too busy worrying how that other person would feel if you brought it up. So, for example, if you were wanting somebody to spend more time with you or to talk more or to do more things or, you're looking to connect with your partner and have, more intimacy, and that's very scary to ask for because you're worried about how they're going to respond to that. All these things are very important and very interesting for us to analyze as an empath. And so when I return, I'm going to be offering you some ways of successfully honing in on the craft, on the superpower that you have and using it to your best of abilities so that we can be successful in all levels of our life to be able to share this with others and use this to the highest good that we possibly can instead of feeling burdened. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. You know it. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm talking to all of you empaths. Being empathic is a superpower. And how do we preserve that superpower for good instead of feeling like it's the ultimate burden? Instead of feeling like all this stress and anxiety is just the way we have to live our life, and I feel like you have to process everybody's emotions in a given room. And I find that a lot of times an empath has what I call overload. We get overloaded with all this stuff going on. And that's why earlier in the show I was talking about eliminating that media influence. eliminating that media influence, because if you don't eliminate that, that's a whole nother add-on to overload you and overwhelm you. And like I was talking about earlier, an empath absorbs. You see it, you take it in, you feel it, you absorb it, you own it, you hold on to it. It takes a while to let it go. Whereas somebody who is not empathic can just let it go, rolls right off their back. They don't care. I mean, you can see a newscast, you can see a news show about something, and they can see the exact same news show, and you can be in tears and feeling as though the world is falling apart and feeling helpless, while that other person's like trying to figure out what kind of tacos they're going to get later on after work, right? So one of the things, too, that a lot of empaths have to be aware of is work and home, right? We have to be aware of the impact of our environment. And some of you are living with folks who actually negatively impact you. Some of you are working amongst folks who overwhelm you, or even the environment, the work environment overwhelms you. And I found too that when you are empathic, it's almost like there's just so much going on, and we're trying to process it all, and we're trying to process everything, and it can be super noisy and overstimulating, and all those things can be happening all at one time, as well as all the energy and the characters that happen to be there in the work environment. And how do you process that? How do you work with that? And so we need to create kind of a protective environment for ourselves. In my own office, I have some things that really, I think, help the energy level. I have some stones and some rocks and such that really benefit me, that I was called to have around me, and it's very powerful. And I feel that the energy of our Mother Earth and the energy of some of these elements can do justice and helping. And I think also creating that space that is yours, like creating a space that is actually yours, whether that's pictures of your dog, pictures of your family or your kids, or a statue or something that really connects with you, that, you know, you feel like a sense of yourself there, you feel good there, you feel strength there, and it's not so overwhelming. I've also realized too that we have to be aware of expressing our needs and connecting in personal relationships as well as professional relationships, because I find that it's hard for an empath to say no. I feel that it's hard for an empath to say no, because it's like you feel bad about saying no, because you feel bad and you worry about how they're going to respond. How are they going to take the no? How are they going to act if you say no? What are they going to say? How are they going to feel? And it's more about how they're going to feel, right? Oh, I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to do this to them. But, you know, ultimately, if you don't say no, you're going to stretch yourself so thin. If you don't say no, you're going to put yourself in a stressful environment. If you don't say no, you're going to add to that. And a lot of times too, remember, when you say yes to all these things, it usually causes anger and resentment at some point as well. So we want to offset that. We don't want to create anger and resentment, and we want to do things to our highest good, because if we're really honestly going to do something, we need to do it the right way and do it to its highest good, because we feel better about it. Stay tuned. Lots more to come to be able to safeguard you as an empath. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm talking to all of you empaths out there. Being empathic is a superpower. It doesn't have to feel like a burden. But how do we make things easier for ourselves? How do we reconnect with ourselves? How do we offset some of the self-sabotaging behavior that us as empaths have a tendency of using? One of the first things that I want to advise, if you're an empath and dealing with these superpowers, is you need to create boundaries. And I know that many of you know what boundaries are, but many of us don't necessarily have them. And boundaries are very important with everyone. And I know that that's something that we're not taught growing up. It's not something we're taught usually by any family members or friends or school or society. Nobody tells you anything about boundaries. They don't explain it at all. And this is very important because if you're an empath, you feel things. You connect with people. You have that sense. And that sense automatically, you have to be very careful, because if you're allowing certain things into your life, you're going to have that exposure. And when we create boundaries, we have to think about what are our boundaries? What are healthy boundaries in our life? And how do we combat some of those energy suckers in our life? I call it energy suckers. If you go back to the 10-day challenge to live your true life, instead of vampires, they're energy suckers, because they might not necessarily be a vampire. They just might suck the energy out of you. They might suck the energy out of you. And if you're an empath, for example, the last thing that you want to be around is someone who is extremely negative. The last thing you want to be around is someone who regurgitates the negative news all day long. You also want to be aware of your tendency as an empath to own other people's issues, to own other people's stuff that they need to go through, to own the problems in a relationship. And I know that some of you may say, well, that kind of sounds codependent, but it also can be very empathic, because you can feel someone else's pain and want to save them. You want to save them from themselves, right? And I don't know about you, but nobody can save someone from themselves. We are our worst enemy. We are our toughest judge. Nobody's going to jump in and be able to save you from going after yourself. We sabotage ourselves the best. The best person that can sabotage you is you, okay? So understanding that, we need to realize that as an empath, you need to be aware of who you're giving your energy to. Who are you hanging out with? Who do you go to get support from? And one of the things, too, that I find with empaths is there's a lot of folks out there who are empathic who have trouble turning down a social invitation. Some of you have trouble turning down social invitations because you feel bad that you won't attend, and you feel bad about how somebody's going to feel about you not being there, and yada, yada, yada. And so you feel bad about it. But in the process, you get to this event, and it's almost like your abilities are exploited, right? They're exploited. It's almost like, you get there and there's like all this energy sucking going on, all these people telling you things that you didn't ask to know, dealing with people's energy. Some of that's good, bad, and indifferent, trying to process all that energy and then trying to stabilize yourself in that event. And I have a good example. I was at a party. This stands out in my mind. It's so interesting how certain things just stand out in your mind, right? I've realized that things that make the biggest impression on you, there was something that went down. So I remember I went to all these football games growing up, and the one football game that I really remember is when it hailed. I remember I went to another football game, and the one football game that you had to sit under the bleachers for 2 hours during a tornado situation. I remember that one very well. This particular party, though, it was interesting because I can't go into all the party goers, and I want to keep that, private at the same point. But it was an interesting party. It was in Los Angeles, and there was a lot of folks there who were extremely famous. And so you have a very interesting dichotomy of folks. And I remember being at this event, and not one time did I ever think that people that were at that level of fame could have any sort of insecurities or fear. And so I wasn't expecting that. And I know that sounds crazy. I get it. But you just don't expect it. And so when I was there, I literally felt myself going into almost like a shell. And it took someone to point it out to me. They're like, wow, what's going on with you? Are you okay? You're like being super quiet. It's totally not like you. And thank God they pointed it out. And I remember I walked outside, and I stayed outside for about 10, 20 minutes, and I felt super better, like a lot better, a lot more clear-headed. I felt better. I was able to, be able to see myself and connect with my own emotions. And then I realized that what I was feeling was a lot of the party-goers' energy, their fear, and I was able to kind of create kind of almost like a invisible boundary around people and their energy at that point, because I deserve to experience life. I deserve to have fun. I deserve to have a good time. And so I started realizing, okay, now I'm realizing I'm interpreting and I'm connecting with these people and their energy. And so I need to really be able to block that and know that that's not me. That's not my feelings. That's not how I feel. But it was very powerful because I wasn't expecting it. And I think that many of you may have experienced the same thing where you walk into a room of people, you're at an event of some sort, and you immediately start feeling different. Maybe you start getting quiet. Maybe you start getting irritated. Maybe you start getting angry. Maybe you start feeling not so good. Maybe you start feeling ill. So all these things need to be taken into consideration. I have been in situations, though, when I had, I'm an empath, and I know that many of you listening obviously are. And I've been in situations where there have been people that are extremely negative, extremely toxic in nature, and, extremely narcissistic, even, malignantly narcissistic. And I've been around people like that before, and this was a long time ago where I wasn't aware of exactly what I was around. Now I can pick it up, I can pick up on it in a few minutes, or a few seconds, usually a few minutes. But I remember before, and I didn't understand it, I would actually start getting physically ill. And so not feeling good, starting to feel sick to my stomach, that sort of thing. And so if you're going through this, you need to analyze, hey, first off, you're an empath. Second of all, you're picking up on other people's feelings. Third of all, you're picking up on other things too that are getting in the way of you living your life to a degree. And there might be some boundaries as far as some events and some folks that you actually need to honestly let go of. And put some boundaries between let go of, not spend time with. Because remember, it's important to really look at the people we spend time with and understand that that directly reflects how we feel and how we are. And so if you've been in a situation recently where you didn't feel like yourself, you started feeling pretty insecure, or you felt overwhelmed, or you felt dreadful, or sad, or angry, or irritated, these are all very interesting indicators. Now, it could be coming from you. It could be you just feeling that way. But in order to know that, you have to have that self-awareness. You have to be able to slow it down and have that self-awareness and ask yourself, is this me? Is this how I'm feeling? I need you to think about that. Is this how I feel? If I feel irritated, what am I irritated about? Where is the irritation coming from? And this is very important. Where is the anger coming from? If it's fearful, where is this fear coming from? Because we need to know where all these feelings are coming from so we can understand exactly what we're dealing with. We have to understand exactly what we're dealing with. And one of the things that I can recommend too is that if you're surrounded by a lot of people and you start feeling not yourself, you need to exit from those people and get enough room away from those people where you can kind of calm yourself down and ask those questions. Am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling this way? And kind of go back to, okay, and being able to be self-aware enough in the moment that when you go from a certain feeling to another kind of feeling. Because that's not really normal as far as we don't go up and down, up and down, up and down. Usually it's a gradual, right? Gradual up, gradual down, and usually that's based on our thoughts. The things that we're thinking really do impress our feelings and how we feel. It could be based on the impact of someone else's comments. As an empath, it could be based on the impact of someone else's emotional situation. It doesn't even have to be said. Nothing has to even be said. You can pick up on it as an empath without them even speaking. It could also be what they're saying, or their mannerisms, or how they walked in, or how they threw things down, or how they acted, or how they responded. All of these things are very important to analyze. And people that aren't empathic, it doesn't really bother them because they don't pick up on it. A lot of people, they don't pick up on it at all. If it's not them, they don't see it. And then you have a large group of our society who are extremely self-centered and narcissistic. And those people, they don't pick up on what you're putting down. So, be aware that you're going to have to do some self-care and some self-maintenance to be able to offset some of this. There might be some events that you cannot attend. There may be some people, and you probably need to start doing some due diligence and start looking at your friends and family. And I'm not saying you're just going to cut them out, But I'm saying, you need to look at some of these people and say, okay, how much time can I really spend around this person? How much time can I healthily, I like to make up words. How much time can I, in a healthy manner, spend time with these people? Healthily. I like that word, healthily. Walk with it. Try it out. It works. But think about that. Is there people in your life like that? Are there people in your life that don't bring happiness? Are there people in your life that when you're around them, automatically you're down? You're automatically feeling off. You're not feeling yourself. And I have some friends, and some acquaintances that I really love them at the core, but I really watch my intake, because I know that the more and more I intake of them and their feelings and their overall attitude, in some cases are not going to be helpful for me, because I'm going to internalize that. And I think that many of you do that. When somebody, comes to you and they have all these issues or problems, and a lot of times too, for an empath, it's very hard when somebody is just ranting and raving without particularly doing anything to solve the problem or to change it. That can be very overwhelming for an empath, because you want to tell them what's going on and you want to call them out on it. You want to say, hey, I'm tired of your you're ranting and raving. You know what I'm going after, and finding faults and everything, but yet you don't want to do anything to fix it. But yet, as an empath, you find it hard to call them out on it because you feel bad for them, because you don't want them to feel bad. You see what I'm saying? And so that becomes this double-edged sword. And if you are an empath, you know exactly what I speak of, because there's some people that you really do need to set straight, but you don't. Because you don't want to have that conversation, but yet not only do you not want to have that conversation, you don't want them to feel bad. And the problem in that is that the more time you spend around them, the more irritation and anger builds up in you, the more you feel limited, the more you feel like there's this weight on you. And so the interactions with them become very, very problematic and very unhealthy. And so there might be some people right now that you need to limit your interaction with. And definitely there's some people that might call you the first thing in the morning. Those people that happen to kind of add to your stress and anxiety, those are not the calls that you answer if you do not have to. Those are the gray rocking. We start using the gray rocking technique. And many of you have heard me talking about the gray rocking technique. And if you don't know what gray rocking is and you want to learn more, or you have an idea but you want to get a better grasp, go to my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search up Ashley Burgess, Berges, Ashley Burgess, and you'll find lots of videos on my YouTube channel dedicated to understanding gray rocking and how to use it. So, we can use the gray rocking when we need to, but also there's a limitation on how much we need to be exposed. And I think that, as an empath, it's hard because you want to save people, you want to help people. What can I do to make them happier? What can I do to make them feel better about themselves? But in reality, remember, we can't change people. We can't save people. Now, we can help people if they ask us for our help. Now, remember that. If somebody doesn't ask you for help, you are not supposed to help them. That is called meddling. If somebody does not ask you for help and you start telling them what to do, that's control. That's meddling. If somebody says, hey, I really do need your help, I could really use, your perspective, and I could really use some help and some guidance, that's a totally different thing. And that opens it up to a very powerful place to be, which is good, but we need to think about that as well. So this is very important. Another thing that I want y'all to think about is mindfulness, being super aware, being in that moment. The more we're in the moment, the more that we're in the present moment, the more we do not get derailed by other people's emotions and feelings. Because if you're in the present moment and you know how you're feeling and you know why you're feeling that, you're not going to get confused about other feelings coming in. And you sit there going, why am I feeling like this? I was feeling good when I got here, and now I'm feeling super stressed or super anxious or super angry or super tense. And if you're mindful, you'll be aware of this and see it coming. You can actually see the progression. You can also stay in your own emotions and feelings and see the difference. You can actually stay in that, process that, and understand that this is coming not from you. This is coming from someone else, and be able to understand that and put up a safe block for yourself so that you can stay where you want to stay mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. We have more coming up, so stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives. With me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been talking about being an empath and what that means to be empathic. It's a superpower, and how to really recognize the things that we can do to safeguard ourselves in multiple different situations. And I think that a lot of times, as far as an empath is concerned, there's a tendency of putting others' feelings before one's own. There's a tendency of confusing one's feelings for another person's feelings, as far as feeling something and then internalizing that and feeling that that's part of ourselves. There's a need to create honest, solid boundaries with everyone in our life. And even if you're not an empath, we still need to do this, but more often than not, if we're not creating boundaries in our life, we don't have healthy relationships. We're not structured. We don't have healthy relationships. We're not creating these relationships that are based on a healthy understanding, a healthy consideration, understanding. These are very important aspects, and especially when you are empathic and taking on all this stuff, there's a tendency to want to save other people. There's a tendency of taking on their emotions and owning those. And then there's a tendency of not having those boundaries, not being able to see the difference between us and them, the ability to not put down limitations. And what I'm saying here is that as an empath, one of the things that you want to do is really check, who are you surrounding yourself by? Who are you spending the most time with? Who do you tell your deepest things to? Who do you interact with on a daily basis? What do those interactions feel like to you? Do those interactions give you strength and power? Do those interactions connect with your highest good? Or do you feel that those interactions create stress and anxiety, undue stress, undue anxiety? Do those interactions create even feeling maybe depressed or overwhelmed? Also, if you're an empath, looking at the type of media that you are ingesting and absorbing. And I said this earlier in the show, in the podcast, is that, someone can watch a newscast that's not an empath, and it doesn't get absorbed like it does with an empath. They're able to see it and go, oh, that's sad, or oh, okay, and they walk on and they let it go. But as an empath, we sit there and look at this news show and we take it in. It rolls all over on us. We feel the feelings and the sadness of the people involved. We can't shake it off. It sticks with you all day. It can stick with you for a lot longer than a day. And you go through that process. And I think that this is very important for us to analyze, and very important for us to understand that these are things that we need to protect ourselves from. You don't need to see the scarring imagery. You don't need to see that stuff as an empath. Not to say that you want to live under a rock or act like it doesn't exist or live in a fairy tale world. That is not the idea that I am putting out there. But I am putting out there the concept of protecting yourself to understand that when you see things, it impacts you and stays with you more than another person that doesn't have that same empathic ability. And knowing that and understanding that means that we need to safeguard ourselves. And so, like what I was talking about at the beginning of the podcast, in the morning, we got to shut off the news. No more news in the morning. No more news on the social media feeds that we read in the morning. We want to set the stage for a good day, because remember, an empath can help other people, can really contribute to other people's society and the dynamics and the interpersonal relationship dynamic, but we can't if we're depleted and we're feeling down, and it feels more like a burden than an actual superpower. I also want you to think about, just look at the day-to-day life, look, what you're exposing yourself to. Another thing that we want to be aware of when we are an empath is we need to be super mindful each moment. How are we feeling? Why are we feeling this way? If you're basically, feeling one way and then you're overcome with another emotion, where is this coming from? How do I slow this down? How do I process it? All very important things to think about. And everybody needs to use mindfulness. Everybody needs to be self-aware of why things are happening in our thoughts to understand ourselves better. But definitely as an empath, this is super important to be able to understand your space and time and how you feel versus the impact of feeling what's around you, and feeling that what you're watching on the news and what you're taking in from media as well. I hope this show has helped you. I hope it's connected with you. Please share it with anybody else that's your empathic friends or family members, because they can probably not only resonate with this, but this show can actually help them to safeguard themselves as well. If you haven't already, check out my YouTube channel. Go to Ashley Burgess, Berges, Ashley, Berges, and I'll be back next week. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. Well, I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.